Oh, hell, Internet. This part is about the United States. Where do I start? I mean, come on. No, I do know where to start because all of the problems with America stem from one thing, and this is it. You've turned your political foundation into a religion, or at least you're in serious danger of doing so. Some Americans literally try and connect the Union and its foundation with Christianity, which is clearly dishonest and absurd on its face. But quite aside from that, can I just confirm, the Constitution is not a holy document. The amendments are not sacred texts, and the Founding Fathers are not prophets. Just can I confirm that, right? The Constitution is a creditable but hardly original 18th century attempt at representative democracy. The amendments are a non-exhaustive and fallible list of, well, amendments. They are very well named as it happens. And the Founding Fathers were an educated bunch of ultimately fallible men. And we could go on about the men part, but we won't right now. But even the Founding Fathers acknowledged all of this. Jefferson had the quote about the tree of liberty needing to be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. This is essentially saying that, yes, we know the system will be gamed at some point in the future. Some will rise to power who do not deserve it, and some kind of reckoning will need to be had. Now, for my part, in a modern mass society with an educated population, it is possible to do this politically. And until about 20 years ago, I think America probably maintained its political virtue, in the Machiavellian sense, not the Christian sense, for demonstrating that ongoing process of representation. Well, not anymore. Hannah Arendt was a great fan of the American political project, to a fault in fact, saying once that the tradition was founded without Platonic violence. I am sure she would have had an answer to the question of the racial impacts of manifest destiny, but I'm not sure those answers would be entirely satisfactory. However, why did she appreciate the project? She saw it as an attempt to recreate the founding of the Roman political tradition. And she saw that as perhaps the most stable political tradition in history because of the way it was constructed. And she thought that that tradition was an important part of any authority that might exist politically. She was right, but only in the context of the old world, the tribal era. And she basically foresaw this too, although she never fully answered the problem. The modern mass society is incapable of mythologizing any political foundation as the root of political authority, and yet America has tried anyway. And again, it's not surprising the way that we are programmed to think. We are programmed to try and create a tether to an ideological bank on the river of history. But the fall of the old world and the scientific discoveries of the 20th century have put an end to this, simply. Now we navigate a much wider ideological expanse, and a tether is no use to us anymore. And that is why the current failure of the US project is precisely what the Founding Fathers wanted to avoid. Its connection to the monotheistic thinking of the old world. The trap was anticipated, and you fell into it anyway. Why? Well, to be sympathetic, probably the same reason China's communism didn't create a utopia, or the Soviet system, or the British Empire, or any of the other empires back to, including and beyond the Romans. One group or another, sooner or later, decides it represents the light eternal, and thus begins the dogmatic decline of its people. The other thing I want to ask about America is, what is freedom exactly? I need to ask because I hear Americans of all different types bleating on about it all the time. Yes, that's condescending, and I do exaggerate, but what exactly does it mean to you all? Because I get the sneaking and uncomfortable suspicion that you literally do want it to mean absolute freedom, in the sense of being able to perform any action that you want at any time. You know, having no action barred to you by any means at all. And unless you really want to live in a state of nature, it never meant that, and can never mean that. Like I said before, more complexity, more regulation. I think I know where the impulse comes from, this sense of rugged individualism from the time of westward expansion, when a lot of people created a cultural bubble based on the idea that, well, we can do what we want because even our closest neighbor is not going to be unduly troubled by the way we choose to do things. And I'm all for preserving as much as that as we can, but you can clearly see that in the modern mass society, that does not actually function as an idea anymore. I know that the phrase "you live in a society" has become almost parodied on the American right. Is it any better if I make that term modern mass society? Of course not. But it still baffles me because of the huge hypocrisies. You say that we don't need to regulate the modern mass society, but your entire consumerist life is based on exactly that. You say you don't want to believe in science. I know that a lot of people do still. Sorry, I'm picking on a minority there. But, the very reason that you're watching this video is proof that you do believe in those principles. And you can't just cherry pick the things that you want to believe in and don't want to believe in. And no, that doesn't rule out scientific incompetence and lack of integrity. But come on. And this idea of absolute freedom is just another one of those canards. No, you don't have absolute freedom. You never did. You never will. It is only the idea of regulation which allows us to set up any enduring systems at all. Imagine a football player who shows up on the field with a machete, and then it's pointed out to him that murdering the opposition is not allowed in the rules, and she's like, "Oh, hey, don't tread on me, man. This is just how I play football. Fuck your rules." Absolute freedom is bullshit, and it always was. Political freedom is the ability to have a stake in the public space, and in the modern mass society, an absolute prerequisite for that, as we saw in previous sections, is a base level of resource, specifically money. And that's where the idea of America is starting to come about at the seams at the moment with its low level of capitalist regulation. And thus we come to Trump. It's impossible not to talk about him as much as I don't want to. A symptom, not a cause, certainly, but I think a perfect, odious example of a self-aggrandizing capitalist buffoon. He so clearly cares not a shit about the world or anyone else in it except himself and his own reputation. And to think that he could actually get elected, let alone that the Republicans would fall behind him en masse. And yes, I know the Democrats are no better with their posturing and virtue signaling, but how is it possible that he got elected? I would say that the one-word answer is education. That is a subject for another day. But how can anyone see him as a strong and confident leader? Listen to the man for 5 minutes. Just listen to the way he speaks and puts ideas together. He riffs and mumbles and pretends to be an expert on every subject. He throws in superlatives without any reference or justification. Everything is the greatest or the most perfect, beautiful, like no one has ever seen before. It's clearly a divine right king mindset. Obviously, there's nothing else you can say about it. And yet, people actually still think that he represents the idea of freedom, as the founding fathers genuinely perhaps did in their own slightly racist way want to accomplish. Now, I know that there will be, in the context of this, areas of the world system that Trump does know about that I do not, okay? There are things that he knows that I don't know, and decision-making factors he uses that I probably should have and don't. That is true. I also know he's a good frontman for a whole bunch of other more mainstream Republican ideas, a few of which, shock horror, I might actually agree with sometimes. And I know that the American president is not quite as important as the doe-eyed reverence that the role is sometimes given in the popular mindset. Seriously, why do previous presidents still get called president? That's really weird. But I also know that there are a whole bunch of relevant issues where I know a fuckload more than Trump. And I know that he doesn't give a fuck about anyone else at all, and for that reason alone he shouldn't be president. End of story. But he is president. Why? You can talk about electoral politics and education here, and a lot of that is relevant. But I think you can come back to the idea of absolute freedom. When no holds are barred, to the victor go the spoils, and the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. And this is sometimes attributed to social Darwinist ideas. But like I said, absolute freedom is only relevant in the state of nature. And in that context, the strong are simply predators. And in any modern mass societal system, social Darwinism is equivalent to saying, yeah, well, we keep wild animals in our village. Bless him, Mr. Tiddles sometimes mauls and eats the occasional person, but that's just his way of expressing his truth, you know? But what is it that creates these predators in the herd? We could talk about incentives and psychology here, and a lot of that is relevant. But one consistently recurring pattern, which we've talked about before, is the cult of personality. Donald Trump is nothing more than a salesperson. Selling himself without a single shred of integrity, which is the only reason for his success. And if you really believe that that makes him fit to be president, well, you know where the comments are. Now, I am a leftist, but I don't want a cult of personality on the left either. Why would I? Clearly, it goes wrong almost all of the time. And none of us is special. Fortuna can make fools of the mighty, and there but for the grace of God go I. America wants the world to believe that it is uniquely worthy as a political entity, and we should look down on all these other systems, these poor man's superpowers and their primitive ideas. Don't make me laugh.